Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Jackie, Mark, and Sean that bring the service for us into being this morning. I always use the talk title as a kind of a launch pad, but then Spirit has its way with me if I'm listening. And so the second letter to the Philippians, verses 1 roughly through 13, capture what has come through for me this morning and that I feel really privileged and blessed to share with all of you. In the New Revised Version, this section has the very appropriate subheading, Imitating Christ's Humility. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others before yourself. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature like God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, when being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient, even to death. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation. And here is what has inspired me in terms of the spiritual faculty of will. We have it here in the wisdom text. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his purpose. It is God in us who wills to act according to God's good purpose for each and every one of us. It's exciting to realize that we can get in the back seat, that there is a will that is divine, a will that has a higher purpose for each and every one of us as we travel on the journey that we have agreed to. After all, I believe that we signed up. This morning I'm inspired to share with you a gift that came to me seemingly out of the wild blue yonder. The former music director at Unity of Windsor gave me a book called Final Gifts. And it is written by two career-long hospice nurses. Their names are Patricia Kelly and Maggie Callanan. And in this book, she talks about how prone we are to engage our personal understanding and will at the moment, especially, of a loved one's death. And their thesis throughout the book is that over time, what we have done with very important and powerful last words from those who are crossing over is that we have dismissed them as mostly not making a lot of sense, not coherent, and above all, not significant, because perhaps they're suffering from, who knows, medication, pain, and so on. And so the entire book chronicles a lifetime that both of them spent listening to words when received humbly as the Christ would, suddenly reveal profound meaning. And so the one that I'm going to share with you this morning tells the story of a couple that married late in life, and the gentleman became very dependent on the wife for the details of life. And they had been married 18 years by the time that she lay dying. And toward the end of her journey, she kept saying, to just generally, sometimes comprehensively, sometimes inaudibly, it's time to get in line. It's time to get in line. And the husband, in his emotional state, repeated that didn't have any meaning for him. I don't know why she keeps saying that. So the loving nurse by the bedside said, well, clearly there's a message in that. It may be for you. Right now, it maybe doesn't convey meaning. However, when you think of a line, what comes to mind for you, Bob? And he said, well, we spent a lot of our time, because we're seniors, traveling together. And I had a tendency to be a little scattered when we were in airports. And so now that I come to think of it, she would often say to me, it's time to get in line. It's time to get in line. And that would wake me up, and I'd say, okay, let's go. Let's get in line. And then the nurse said to him, well, since she's getting ready to go, I wonder what else we might understand about getting in line. And he said, well, I have no idea. I don't know. And she said, well, in terms of being ready to travel the rest of your journey, have you made any plans for how your life will look without her? Because my understanding is that you have really relied on her for a lot of things. And he said, yes, I have. He said, I've decided I'm going to spend 6 months out of every year with my son. And then the other 6 months, I'm going to go to Florida, where my brother is. So the nurse said, had you told Linda that was your plan? And he was scandalized. No, I didn't. I'm not going to tell her what I'm going to do when she's gone. And the nurse said, why not? And he thought about it, and he said, well, it just doesn't seem kind to outline for her, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing when you're gone. And the nurse said, it could be what she's asking you to share with her when she says it's time to get in line. And so at his next visit to her bedside, he got courageous, and he leaned in and he said, Linda, honey, this is what I'm going to do. This is my plan. And then the nurse writes that it was not accidental that just a few minutes later, Linda took her last breath and passed. So in considering the final gift that a person gives us, if we are open and receptive to the fact that they may already be between realms and expressing a last wish, I received a gift this week when my friend John, who was my first Unity teacher, made his transition on Wednesday. And I think I shared in a previous talk that he had been pretty resolved to medically induced death and then had been denied that because the hospice where he wanted to go was not aligned with that choice. So at least that's what he was told. And so after he got that news, he was very resigned, and he just looked at me and said what he often did. One of his lines was, "It's okay, Roz. It's okay." And I said, all right. And so it happened that as he let go and as he completely humbled himself before the God that I know he knew as a presence in him, he was able to pass very peacefully the other day with his daughter and a brother and a father figure at his side. I had been up there around 6 in the evening, and I went back up at 7:30, and his daughter Karen said, "Dad just passed." And he had not been speaking to us or very conscious for probably the previous 3 or 4 days. But as he was leaving, he said, "I have to get back to the farm." He was born and raised on a big farm in Ontario where we will be celebrating his life in a couple of weeks, a teeny tiny place called Mount Bridges. And he loved the farm. And 2 years ago, I celebrated his sister's life in October of 2019 up there. And 2 years prior to that, his mom and dad passed. And so how powerful for him to say, "I've got to get back to the farm." And his daughter, because she was raised by him and I believe very illumined, just said, "Yes, Dad, they're waiting for you, all of them." And he passed peacefully. So that was a gift to know that he had in fact uttered words after days and days of not saying anything. But my talk this morning about humility, about surrender, about yielding to the will that is always alive in us anyway. The only thing that shifts is our degree of awareness with and complying with it. I woke up the day after John passed and had not come to consciousness and had not had a thought, and yet this came through for me. And so I want to share it with you because it has changed me, and because I feel that as my first truth teacher, he understood where I am currently in my spiritual unfoldment. And I feel that John came through as this statement. And it says, "Dwelling in consciousness, I am aware of thy presence as me." Dwelling in consciousness, I am aware of thy presence as me. So of course, once I was awake, I thought, is that true? Am I? Am I aware of thy presence as me? And so that's feeling like it's going to be John's last homework assignment to me for the rest of my journey, to truly integrate that as I dwell in consciousness and become more and more aware of thy presence as me, that my will, my personal small self will, falls away more naturally, more readily, more easily. I suppose no unity message is complete without something from one of our co-founders. And Charles Fillmore White writes this in Christian Healing. God is potential, unformed will. Some of us who have been together studying Goldsmith, who tells us to go and be quiet and just keep asking the question, what is God? What is God? What is God? Certainly Fillmore offers this. God is potential, unformed will. I don't want that unformed will to go through the filter of my personal desires, fears, and ambitions. I would like that unformed will, which is God, to express in, through, and from me as my awareness that thy presence is me, as me, grows deeper. Fillmore says, when we link our personal will with the principal divine force, we then have superior executive capacity. We swiftly then will bring forth faculties that under the otherwise slow action of the human personality would take ages, he says, to develop. And so I think about John's words, it's time to get back to the farm. It's time for all of us to go back to the source, to recognize that it is the degree to which I am aware of the presence as me. To that exact degree does the divine will then operate in and through me. Two things come up for me in terms of integrating this practice of thy presence as me, I am aware of. And one comes up in something that I had read in an old-time Unity teacher's writing, Imelda Shanklin. Some of you might recognize What Are You? As her work. And it was one of the earliest books that I taught from for my own learning, obviously. And here's what she says about this practice of getting the small personal will to get in line and to go back to the source within. She says, perhaps you think of non-resistance as indifference, as spiritless yielding to just whatever occurs. You may think of it as a teaching fit only for those who are unfit, and as a practice suited only to those who are incapable of self-defense. Well then, she says, if you do, you miss the whole meaning of the word non-resistance. Because non-resistance is stronger than resistance. And get this, its consistent practice requires more mind capacity than does resistance. The appeal of non-resistance is to the divine thing in you. It is the essence of God. Wow. So now we have a definition for what is God, and we have a definition for the essence of God as non-resistance to that always available, always resident, always governing will of Source. And so the last thing I'd like to leave you with this morning is something that I believe we have looked at together before. And it is for me a prayer that I go back to often if the small will of me is on the scene, afraid, controlling. I don't do a lot of anxiety, but those first two show up as my personal will. just that, tendency that any of us who come from addictive patterns have to control, especially the future, the outcome. And so this prayer, you've heard me recite it. It was received really in a moment of illumination by a Unity minister by the name of Deidre Price. And fittingly, it is called the Grace Prayer. And it incorporates the last 7 words of Jesus the Christ before he made his transition. So I find the unity, the coherence, the common thread that runs through this message is truly for me that those are final gifts. And the final gifts of the Master came through in the 7 words that he left us with. In looking at interpretation of those words before we look at the grace prayer, I looked at what Emmett Fox has said about it, and he said there's room for a lot of misinterpretation when people around Jesus could not understand his crying out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. And you've heard me talk about that a few times because the Aramaic Bible scholar, George Lamza, insists that we have misunderstood that. And in fact, they assumed that he was calling upon God when he was, in fact, praying in Aramaic. Emmett Fox writes, it was the language he had learned as a little boy, and they were followed by 7 utterances. And the first of these, of course, comes from his humanity, and it is repeated in the grace prayer. And so this is how the words of the grace prayer incorporates the final gifts that Jesus left for our governance, guidance, and edification in allowing divine will to run every detail of our lives. I thirst for thee, O Lord. So acknowledging our humanity, we are here in this material realm. Into thy hands I commit my spirit, my soul, my body, my life. Lots of surrender there, turning it all over, yielding to the will. My spirit, my soul, my body, my life. And here it comes, this situation. So what situation in my life am I clutching, grasping, believing I need to change, fix, predict, organize? This situation, when I say this prayer, I see the situation. I don't speak it. In other words, I do not bring the power of my spoken word to whatever that situation is that is looming large enough in my consciousness as it is that I'm failing in that moment to dwell in consciousness, aware of thy presence as me. Next, it takes Jesus's word and says, all unforgiven states. So just bring them all into a circle, like you're calling a meeting, and then release all unforgiven states. For the prayer states next, for thy will is my will. Thy will is my will. For you heal that which needs to be healed. You reveal that which needs to be revealed. Right. So I don't have to go looking for it. If I can be still and know, it will be revealed. You heal that which needs to be healed. You reveal that which needs to be revealed so that I may what? Glorify you, O God, and live in the fullness of your grace. to live unwaveringly in the fullness of grace is available to us when we live with the humility that the Master and so many other illumined souls modeled. And so let's go into this wonderful rest of the month of August, conscious of that small will showing up on the scene, thinking it's in charge, and remembering, dwelling in consciousness, I am aware of thy presence as me. Amen.
Amen.
It is so.